used to believe that love could survive anything, even death. When my husband passed away last year, I told myself that as long as I still had Amanda, our daughter, I could keep going. I was wrong. After his funeral, the house in Cedar Park felt haunted. Every room whispered his name, the smell of his coffee in the kitchen, the indentation on his pillow. Nights were the worst. I'd wake up half expecting to hear his voice calling me for tea. So when Amanda suggested I sell the house and move in with her and Chad, I agreed. She said it would only be temporary. I wanted to believe that was love. The first day I arrived, Chad barely looked up from his phone. He muttered something like, "Guest rooms in the back." Amanda tried to smile, but it was tight and distracted. I told myself he just needed time to adjust. I cooked dinner that night, his favorite, chicken pot pie, hoping to break the ice. He ate it without saying a word. I laughed nervously, saying, "You know, your mother-in-law used to be a good cook." He shrugged and said, "Guess times change." That was the first cut. Days turned into weeks. I kept to my little room, folded laundry, ran errands, tried to earn my stay. But Chad's eyes always followed me like I was some stray dog scratching at the door. He'd roll his eyes when I asked simple questions, change the channel when I was mid-show. Once, as he walked past me in the hallway, I heard him mutter, "Freeloader." I froze. I wanted to believe I misheard. But the truth was, I didn't. "Amanda," she said nothing. When I tried to tell her, she sighed, said, "He's stressed. Mom, work's been rough." I smiled, nodded, swallowed the shame. Because that's what mothers do, we carry it quietly. Until that night. It was raining hard outside. The three of us sat at the dinner table, the silence thick enough to choke on. Amanda scrolled on her phone. Chad sipped his beer, smirking. Then out of nowhere, he said, "You know, maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." Amanda froze. I looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, lazy and cruel. "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not paying rent. We've got bills. Margaret, we didn't sign up to feed extra mouths." The words hit harder than any slap could. I turned to Amanda, my last hope for kindness, but she didn't look up. "Maybe it's best, Mom," she whispered, "if you find something more stable. For everyone's sake." I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just stood up, walked to my room, and packed 2 suitcases. That's all I had left of a lifetime. No one followed me to the door. Outside, the wind bit through my coat. The city lights blurred through my tears. I sat on the curb with those 2 suitcases. My phone dead, my heart emptier than it had ever been. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to be erased. That night, I checked into a motel, the kind where the wallpaper peels and the vending machine eats your quarters. I stared at the ceiling until morning. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was hollow. But somewhere, deep in that silence, something small and stubborn survived, a spark I didn't recognize yet. A spark that one day would burn everything they thought they'd buried. The motel smelled of old carpet and cigarette ghosts. The kind of place people disappear into, not forever. Just long enough to stop being seen. That first night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the vending machine outside my door. I thought about Amanda's face, not cruel. Just blank. That was worse. Indifference always hurts more than anger. I texted her the next morning. "I understand. I love you always." No reply. Days bled into each other. I measured time by the changing faces at the front desk. The world kept moving. I stood still. I sent another message a week later. Then another. Birthdays. Little check-ins. Silence. Grief is a strange creature. It doesn't kill you all at once. It eats you slowly, through shame. Through the echo of your own name in an empty room. I tried applying for jobs, front desks, grocery stores, cleaning gigs. Every interview ended the same, polite smiles. Quick rejections. No one wanted to hire a grieving widow in her late 50s with no recent work history. I started thinking maybe I could babysit. Maybe clean houses again. But my hands ached. My knees stiffened. My body had its own limits now. One evening, as the rain whispered against the window, I pulled a small cardboard box from under the bed, The only thing I'd saved besides my clothes. Inside were old photos, letters, my husband's watch, and something I hadn't noticed before, a small leather-bound book. My mother's diary. I don't remember packing it. Maybe I slipped it in by instinct. Maybe it found me. Either way, I opened it. The leather creaked like an old secret waking up. The first pages were simple weather notes, grocery lists, Sunday church musings. I smiled for the first time in weeks. But then, I turned to a page dated June 3rd. He came again today, said he wished things were different, said he wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a business, a name to protect. Margaret must never know. She was born out of mistake and desire. I just pray she forgives me one day. My breath caught. I read it again, then again, my name, in her handwriting, tied to words that didn't make sense. I kept turning pages. Every entry carried pieces of a hidden story. Meetings at hotels, cash payments she didn't want but needed. Then one line that made my heart pound so loud I thought the walls could hear it. He promised me a trust. Said his lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, will know what to do if anything ever happens to him. Goldstein. The name rang in my head like a faint echo. I'd seen it before, in an old envelope. A newspaper, somewhere in my childhood. It took me 2 days and several trips to the motel's communal computer to find him. Leonard Goldstein, retired estate lawyer, still listed under a small private firm in Dallas. I didn't call. My hands trembled too much. Instead, I wrote a letter, a real one, pen, paper, shaky handwriting. I told him my name, my mother's name, and asked if he remembered her. 2 weeks later, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. His voice was old, careful, but when I said, Margaret, and then my mother's name, something cracked on the other end of the line. I always wondered if you'd reach out someday. He said quietly, there's something you need to see. The next morning, I took a Greyhound bus to Dallas. My suitcase was half packed, just in case this was a mistake. I watched the city roll by through fogged windows, the hum of the engine like a lullaby for the broken. When I arrived, Leonard Goldstein was waiting in a quiet office filled with dust and books. The smell of old paper wrapped around me like memory. He looked at me for a long time, like he was searching for someone in my face. Then he opened a drawer and slid a yellowed envelope across the table. Your mother wanted you to have this, he said, from Harold James Sterling. I froze. That name, Sterling, was everywhere in Texas. The founder of Sterling Energy, an oil empire, a man I'd seen in newspapers my whole life. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter addressed to my daughter, Margaret Louise. I couldn't breathe. He confessed everything, the affair, the regret, the cowardice, and then, one line that changed the course of my life. In the event of my death, I have insured a portion of my personal assets, untraceable through my estate, are to be delivered to you through Mr. Goldstein. You are my blood, and though I was too much a coward to claim you in life, I claim you now in death. Leonard slid another folder toward me. Bank accounts, ownership papers, investment certificates. The total value, a little over $1 million. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just sat there, staring at the papers, whispering, this is real? He nodded. It's always been yours. For the first time in months, I smiled, not because of the money, but because for once, I wasn't forgotten, I was seen. That night, back at the motel, I lay awake like always. But the ceiling didn't look like a tomb anymore. It looked like a blank page. They thought they'd erased me. But life had just handed me a pen. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight poured through the thin motel curtains like it didn't care who it touched. The world was still spinning. Bills were still unpaid, and I was still a mother without a home, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving, I was thinking. The letter from Harold James Sterling sat on the motel table, edges yellowed, heavy with the weight of everything I didn't know about my own life. I read it again and again until I could recite every word. My hands shook, not from disbelief this time, but from realization. All my life I had been poor, small, invisible, when in truth, I had been born from a man who built an empire. I stared at his signature. At those final words. I claim you now in death. I whispered to myself, you're a little late, Harold. But still, something in me softened. Because for once, someone had written my name and meant it. Leonard Goldstein met me again that afternoon. His office smelled of dust and quiet power. He looked at me like a man who had carried a secret too long. Your mother was extraordinary, he said. She refused every offer he made until she realized she had to think of you. She didn't want you to live in his shadow. She wanted you to have freedom, not guilt. Freedom, the word hit me like air after drowning. He explained how Harold had set up a small, discreet trust before his death, hidden through layers of shell companies to avoid scandal. The money had been quietly growing for years. He couldn't claim you publicly, Leonard said, but he never forgot you. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All my life, I thought my mother was ashamed of me. Now I realized she had been protecting me. When I left the office, the sky above Dallas was pale and endless. I walked for hours with my suitcase rolling behind me, the letter tucked against my chest like a heartbeat. I passed glass towers and cafes full of people who would never know that a woman walking past them had just learned she wasn't who she thought she was. That night, I didn't return to my motel right away. I sat in a diner on the corner of Elm Street, ordered a coffee I couldn't finish, and thought about Amanda. Would she believe me? Would she even care? No, I thought. She'd say it doesn't change anything. That's what people say when they don't understand what everything means. I returned to the motel close to midnight. The hall smelled like bleach and loneliness. I unlocked my door, set my suitcase down, and spread the papers across the bed, bank statements, property certificates, account numbers, numbers that didn't look real to someone who'd once stretched $1 for dinner. But as I stared at them, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel greedy, I felt powerful. Not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, I had options. I stayed awake until dawn, reading, planning, remembering every cruel word Chad had thrown at me. Every moment Amanda had looked away, they came back to me. But this time, they didn't hurt the same way. They didn't define me anymore. They had pushed me out thinking I was helpless. But the woman they discarded was gone. The next morning, I called Leonard again. If I wanted to move this money into something secure, I asked. Something under a new name. Can we do that quietly? He smiled, like he'd been waiting for that question. Of course, he said. It's already protected by law. But I can help you make it invisible. Invisible. That was exactly what I needed. Over the next few weeks, Leonard and I worked together. He taught me how to form an LLC, how to read property reports, how to hide behind numbers and legal language the way rich men have done for centuries. I learned fast. Grief had sharpened me. Betrayal had taught me patience. By the time I left Dallas, I wasn't Margaret, the forgotten widow, anymore. I was ML Holdings, owner of potential. On the bus ride back to Austin, I watched the highway blur past. The same city that had chewed me up and spat me out was waiting for me, but it didn't know I was coming back with armor. When I stepped off the bus, I didn't head toward Amanda's building. I didn't even look in that direction. Instead, I walked into a coffee shop, ordered an espresso, and opened the property listings on my phone. And that's when I saw it. A small apartment complex on East Austin, the very one where Amanda and Chad lived. Foreclosure auction, owner defaulting on taxes, 2 weeks until sale. I stared at the screen. My heart began to pound. Fate, I thought, doesn't knock twice. I didn't hesitate. I called Leonard the next morning. I want to buy a property, I said. Which one? He asked. I told him the address. There was a pause on the line, and then a quiet, knowing tone. You're sure? Yes, I said, I'm sure. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted balance. For years, I had built homes for other people, cooked in their kitchens, cleaned their floors, watched my own family drift away. Now, I would own something solid. Something they couldn't take away. Leonard handled the paperwork. I wired the funds quietly, using my new company name. No headlines, no gossip, no trace of Margaret, the mother who once begged for shelter. Just one line on a contract that changed everything. Buyer, ML Holdings. The auction came and went. And in one silent transaction, I became the legal owner of the very building that had seen me humiliated and discarded. That night, I sat at my rented desk, staring at the deed, the ink still fresh, and whispered to myself, "Let's see how Chad likes paying rent to a mouth he couldn't feed." The motel ceiling no longer felt heavy. It felt like a sky full of quiet thunder. It's strange how power doesn't feel like lightning when it finally arrives. It feels quiet, controlled, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for too long. Owning that building didn't make me feel vengeful. It made me feel awake. For months, I'd been drowning in shame, believing I was a burden. Now, I had a purpose, one no one could see coming. I moved out of the motel the same week the sale finalized. I rented a small, modern apartment downtown, nothing extravagant, but clean, quiet, with large windows that let the light in. I could see the city from there, the same city that once looked down on me, now resting under my gaze. Every morning, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and studied. I watched YouTube tutorials about real estate contracts, taxes, market trends. I wrote notes like a student desperate to understand the language of power. I wasn't trying to build an empire. I just never wanted to be powerless again. Leonard checked on me often. "You're a fast learner," he said. I smiled. "Grief makes a good teacher," I replied. 2 weeks later, I signed the final transfer papers. ML Holdings, my initials. My armor, now officially owned the property at East Austin. I remember running my fingers over the embossed seal on the deed. My heart steady. That night, I didn't toast with champagne. I sat by the window with tea, the city lights flickering below, and whispered, "I'm home." But not the kind of home Amanda and Chad offered me. This one was built from self-respect. When the property manager confirmed that tenants would be notified of new ownership, I asked him to keep the name behind ML Holdings confidential. "Just routine restructuring," I said. "No changes except lease reviews." He nodded. He didn't need to know more. And so, the letters went out. To every tenant. Including one for Amanda Harmon and her husband, Chad. The new rent amounts were based on market value, triple what they had been paying. Fair, on paper, but I knew it would shake their fragile little kingdom. I imagined Chad opening that envelope, beer still in hand, his smirk vanishing as his eyes ran down the numbers. I imagined Amanda's soft voice trying to calm him while fear clouded her eyes. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to tip the scales back to zero. Because the truth was, they had taken something from me that night, not money, not space, but dignity, and dignity deserved restitution. 2 days after the letters were sent, my phone rang. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, I don't know if you heard, but something weird's going on. Our rent just shot up. Like, a lot. Chad's furious. Can we talk?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I listened twice, then deleted it. This wasn't a conversation. It was gravity, and gravity always wins in silence. I started visiting the building. Quietly. In the evenings, I'd walk past the mailboxes, pretending to check on maintenance work. No one recognized me. My hair was shorter now, my clothes sharper, my walk more confident. I wasn't the same woman who'd stood on that curb with 2 suitcases. One night, I saw them through the courtyard window. Amanda pacing, Chad shouting, his hand slamming the counter. Her flinching. I watched, just for a moment, and something inside me twisted. It wasn't satisfaction. It was sadness. I didn't want her destroyed. I wanted her awake. I drove home that night with the windows down, the cool air biting my face. I thought about how strange it was that love and justice could live in the same heart. That sometimes, the only way to save someone is to let them fall. Days turned into weeks. I oversaw repairs, leaky pipes, broken locks, hallway lights. I made sure tenants other than Chad and Amanda were taken care of first. Everyone else benefited from the upgrades. Their rent increases were reasonable. Chad's, however, remained untouched and overdue. He sent furious emails to the management office. Threats, accusations, calling the new owner a greedy, faceless coward. I read every one of them from my laptop with a small, calm smile. My property manager asked if I wanted to respond personally. I said no, just quote the lease clauses. I told him, we stay professional. The power of silence is that it drives people like Chad mad. As for Amanda, she started calling again. Little messages left in the dark. Mom, I really need to talk. Please call me back. Chad's upset. Things are hard. But every time I saw her name, I remembered the way she looked away that night. How she'd chosen peace over truth, comfort over conscience. So I didn't pick up. Instead, I focused on learning. I joined small business meetups under a pseudonym, listened more than I spoke, learned how wealthy people hid their names behind signatures and trust funds. One night, I attended a networking dinner. A man across the table asked what I did. I smiled, lifted my glass, and said, I own property. He nodded approvingly. No one saw the irony. It felt good, not to lie, but to exist in a truth that was finally mine. I began to walk differently. Shoulders back, head high, not arrogance, just peace. I was invisible in a new way now. The kind of invisible that gets you through locked doors. A month after the letters went out, I returned to the building again. Not as Margaret the mother, but as the owner, the observer. Amanda and Chad's lights were still on. Their blinds drawn. I could see their silhouettes, Amanda's pacing, Chad's angry gestures slicing through the air. I whispered to the night, you did this, Chad, not me. Then I turned and left, heels clicking softly against the pavement. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need revenge. I had something far more powerful, control. That night, before bed, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were sharper, colder, but not cruel. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. They had turned me into a ghost. But I had come back as the landlord. Power is a strange companion. It doesn't heal you. It doesn't hug you. It just gives you the quiet to finally hear your own heartbeat. Weeks passed after the rent hike. The property repairs were nearly done. The other tenants were happy, appreciative even. They sent thank you notes to the management office. Little things like, the new lighting is great, or, finally, someone who cares about maintenance. I smiled when I read those, because they reminded me that justice doesn't always have to shout. Sometimes, it just works. But Chad, he was unraveling. He sent another email through the tenant portal, this one dripping with indignation. This rent increase is outrageous. I demand to know who's behind ML Holdings. Whoever they are, they'll regret this. My property manager forwarded it to me. I read it 3 times, then replied with a single line. Please respond with Clause C, market rate adjustment. No exceptions. He didn't know that the faceless landlord he was cursing was the same woman he once told to get out of his house. Amanda, on the other hand, had gone quiet. No more angry voicemails, just small, soft messages that broke my heart in ways I didn't expect. Hi, Mom, just wanted to see if maybe we could talk. Chad's struggling. I am too. I miss you. Every time I read one, I felt the ache rise, the part of me that still wanted to hold her. To tell her it would be okay. But I also remembered the night she stood by while I was humiliated at her dinner table. The silence she chose then. So I gave her silence now. It wasn't cruelty, it was consequence. One afternoon, I drove past the building again. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky gold and gray. I parked across the street, hidden in plain sight. Through their window, I saw Amanda sitting at the kitchen table, head in her hands. Chad paced behind her, shouting, his arms flailing. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd heard them before, in the same voice, the same tone, only now, they weren't aimed at me. Amanda flinched when he slammed his hand against the wall. My throat tightened. I wanted to get out of the car, to knock on that door, to drag her away, but I stayed, because she had to see what I had seen, to understand what happens when you let cruelty grow inside your home. I whispered into the steering wheel. You'll learn, my girl, you'll learn. When I drove away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Because justice, real justice, isn't sweet, it's heavy. A few days later, my building manager emailed me a report. Tenant in Unit 3B, the Harmons, has been late on rent for 2 consecutive months. No response to reminders. I authorized a notice, formal but kind. I didn't want eviction. I wanted reflection. At night, I sat on my couch in my downtown apartment, sipping tea, watching the city lights flicker through the blinds. My mind kept going back to Amanda's face, the way she used to light up when her father came home from work. How she'd press her tiny hands against his cheeks and say, "Daddy, you smell like the sun." Now she lived with a man who brought only storm clouds. And I had become the lightning that struck in silence. A week later, I saw her, by accident, at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun. Dark circles under her eyes. Shoulders curved inward. She looked smaller somehow. We stood 2 aisles apart, me by the canned soups, her by the pasta boxes. She picked up a box of mac and cheese, stared at it, then slowly put it back. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, sighed, and rubbed her eyes. I froze. My throat burned. For a moment, I wasn't the woman who owned her building. I was just her mother, the one who used to hold her after nightmares. Who kissed scraped knees and packed lunches with little notes that said, "You're my sunshine." I turned my cart down the next aisle before she could see me. My hands shook the entire way to the checkout line. When I got home, I sat on the couch for hours, staring at nothing. Justice was working, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like surgery, necessary, but painful. That night, I whispered to the empty room, "I don't hate you, Amanda. I just can't save you until you see who you've become." The next morning, my property manager called. "We've had another complaint," he said, from a neighbor downstairs. The Harmons were arguing again, loudly, something about money. I closed my eyes. "It's fine," I said softly, "just keep me updated." Then I hung up and looked around my apartment. The plants I'd bought were growing. The kitchen smelled of coffee and calm. I was rebuilding, quietly, brick by brick. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I felt the old ache flicker, the longing for my daughter's voice. The warmth of family dinners. The sound of laughter echoing down a hallway that no longer existed. But that was the price of truth. Because sometimes, silence isn't the absence of love, it's the echo of self-respect. A few days later, I checked my phone. No new messages, no missed calls, just the quiet hum of peace mixed with a loneliness I was still learning to live with. I poured another cup of tea and whispered to myself. You wanted them to feel the weight of their choices. Now they do. Outside, the city lights shimmered. Somewhere, Amanda was crying. Chad was shouting. In me, I was learning that the most powerful revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about becoming someone they can never touch again. I used to think revenge was fire, loud, blazing, uncontrollable. But standing in the middle of it now, I realized it wasn't fire at all. It was ice. Cold, quiet, precise. After Amanda's silence stretched into weeks, I thought maybe they had moved out. But then the updates started coming in from the building manager. The late payments, the noise complaints, the broken tiles, the mildew in the bathroom. The apartment was falling apart, just like the people inside it. And still, I said nothing. Then one evening, as the sky outside turned the color of bruised lavender, my intercom buzzed, a soft, uncertain sound. Hi, this is Amanda Harmon. I was wondering if Margaret, my mom, lives here. For a long moment, I didn't move. My heart pounded so loud it filled the room. Then, slowly, I pressed the door release. 10 minutes later, there was a knock, soft, hesitant. When I opened the door, she stood there, soaked from the rain, clutching a grocery bag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her hair was limp, her makeup smudged, her shoulders trembling. She looked nothing like the girl who once told me, "We just want our own space." "Hi, Mom," she whispered. I stepped aside. She entered cautiously, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. I handed her a towel. "Put the kettle on," and poured her tea without saying a word. The silence between us was thick. But not cruel, just heavy with everything left unsaid. She sat on the couch, both hands around the mug. I don't know where to start, she said. I stayed quiet. Chad's not easy, she began. He's angry all the time. Blames the rent, blames work, blames me. Her voice cracked. He yells at everything, at everyone, even the dog next door. I listened. No interruptions, no comfort. Then she said it. I thought I was doing the right thing back then, when we asked you to leave. I just wanted peace. Chad said, he said you'd never leave unless we pushed you. She looked down at her shaking hands. And I let him. The air left the room. I miss you, she whispered, but I don't know how to fix it. I studied her face, pale, hollow, but still my daughter. The same eyes that used to search for monsters under the bed now filled with guilt. Finally, I spoke. My voice was low, steady. You didn't let him, Amanda. You stood with him. She flinched. Her lips parted like she wanted to deny it, but couldn't. I begged for one word from you that night. I said softly, just one word, and you gave me silence. Her breath hitched. She looked away, tears gathering but not falling. I didn't think it would get this bad, she said. I thought I could manage him. You can't manage a man like that, I replied. You survive him, or you leave him. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. The clock ticked softly between us, marking every unspoken apology. We sat that way for almost an hour. No shouting, no demands, just two women, mother and daughter, quietly circling the wreckage of their love. When she finally stood, she hesitated at the door. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just needed to remember what it felt like to be safe. I wanted to tell her she always could be, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached out and took her hand, held it a little longer than she expected. Then I let go. When the door clicked shut, I sank into my chair, still holding the warmth of her teacup in my palms. She had come. She had looked me in the eye. And that meant the cracks were forming, not just in her marriage, but in the walls she'd built between us. The next few days were silent again. But this time, I didn't feel hollow. I felt ready, because I knew what was coming. When men like Chad lose control, they don't fall quietly. 2 nights later, I got a call from the property manager. Ms. Hughes, he still called me by my professional alias. We've had some issues. Tenant in 3B's been down here twice this week, demanding to know who owns the building. He's getting aggressive. Did you tell him? I asked. Of course not, he said. Everything's private, but he's been asking around. Even called the title office pretending to be a lawyer. He's desperate. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly. Let him dig, I said. He'll only find shadows. And I was right. Chad's paranoia grew by the day. He started emailing under fake names, trying to trick the management team into revealing information. When that didn't work, he showed up in person, red-faced, shouting about corruption and conspiracies. The office filed a report. Then came the envelope. No name, no return address, just a single sheet of paper. I know what you're doing. You think you're clever, but you don't scare me. I'll find you, and when I do, you'll regret it. No signature, but I didn't need one. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same jagged, heavy strokes Chad used on rent checks. I sat there with the letter in my hands, the past and present colliding in silence. It took me back to that night at their dinner table, when he told me I was a burden. When Amanda looked away. When I walked out with 2 suitcases and no one followed. Only now, he was the one standing on shaky ground, gasping for control. And I was the one holding the floor steady, deciding how long before I pulled it from under him. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, and called my lawyer. Increase security, I said, quietly. He did. Cameras, new locks, discreet patrols. I wasn't afraid. Because this time, I was the one prepared. Amanda didn't call again for a while, but the building manager said he'd seen her walking to work instead of driving. The car was gone. The lights in their apartment went dark earlier each night. I imagined her lying awake, staring at the ceiling like I once did, wondering where it all went wrong. And maybe, for the first time, realizing that silence can be both a punishment and a teacher. I poured myself a cup of tea that night, opened my mother's diary again, and ran my fingers over the line that started it all. She must never know. But I did know now. And knowledge, I realized, was the most merciful kind of power, the one that lets you decide when to speak. And when to let the silence speak for you. There's a moment, just before the truth comes out, when time seems to hold its breath. The air thickens, and silence feels louder than words ever could. I had lived in that silence for months. But now, it was time for it to speak. The invitation went out on a Tuesday morning. Mandatory tenant meeting, discussion of upcoming building renovations and lease adjustments. Attendance required. It was standard procedure, professional and clean, but for me, it was the final act. I arrived early that day. I wore a charcoal gray blazer and dark jeans, sharp, simple, deliberate. My hair fell in soft waves over my shoulders. The woman in the mirror that morning looked nothing like the one Chad had kicked out of his home. She looked like someone who had learned the cost of silence, and how to use it. The common room filled slowly. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and nerves. Tenants trickled in, chatting quietly, holding coffee cups and curiosity. Then came him. Chad walked in first, Amanda trailing behind like a ghost of herself. His face was tight, jaw locked, the swagger still there but cracked at the edges. He scanned the room, eyes narrowing as he spotted the property manager at the front. "Where is she?" he demanded. "I want to talk to the owner, not some middleman hiding behind emails." The manager smiled politely. "All questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Mr. Harmon." Chad scoffed and crossed his arms. Amanda kept her head down. I sat near the back. Calm, invisible. The presentation began, maintenance updates, security improvements, new landscaping, all practical. Every detail had been paid for, in part, by the same man now fuming in the corner. Finally, the property manager paused and said, "Before we conclude, we'd like to thank ML Holdings for their commitment to revitalizing the property. The owner is here today. Should anyone have questions?" And just like that, the silence snapped. I stood up. Every eye in the room turned. The click of my heels on the linoleum echoed like a heartbeat. I walked slowly toward the front. Steady, unhurried. When I turned to face them, I saw it, confusion, disbelief, and then something deeper in Chad's face, fear. Amanda's mouth fell open. "Good evening," I said softly. "My name is Margaret." I let the name hang there. "I'm the owner of this building." For a long, perfect second, no one breathed. Then Chad shot to his feet so fast his chair screeched against the floor. This is a joke, right? You can't, this isn't." I met his eyes, calm as still water. "No joke, just business. You manipulated this. You've been behind this the whole time." His voice cracked under the weight of panic. "You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us." I tilted my head slightly. "I raised everyone's rent, Chad. Market adjustment, nothing personal." Then, quieter, "You did that part yourself." He took a step toward me, trembling with fury. Amanda reached out to touch his arm, but he shook her off. "You think you've won?" he spat. I smiled, a small, tired smile. "No, I think I finally stopped losing." The room stayed silent. No one dared move. I turned back to the other tenants. My voice steady. "If anyone has questions about the improvements or renovations, I'll stay afterward to discuss them. Thank you for coming." I sat down. The presentation continued, though no one heard a word. Chad didn't sit. He stood there, fists clenching and unclenching, eyes burning holes into the floor. Amanda sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tight, tears welling but refusing to fall. When the meeting ended, people approached me, shy smiles, polite thank yous. Some had suspected the mysterious ML Holdings was a local investor, but not one of their own. When the last tenant left, only 3 of us remained, me, Amanda, and Chad. He stepped forward first. "You think you've made some kind of point, huh? You think this changes anything? You made an enemy today." I rose to meet him. Eye to eye. No, Chad. You made one the day you looked me in the eye and decided I didn't matter. He flinched. Just barely, but enough. Amanda stood suddenly, her voice trembling. Chad, stop. He turned to her, furious. What did you just say? I said stop, she shouted this time. The sound startled even her. She's not your enemy. She never was. You are. His face twisted, confusion and rage tangling together. You're taking her side now? Amanda's voice cracked. No, I'm taking mine. Silence fell again, thick and final. Chad backed away, shaking his head, muttering curses under his breath. Then he stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Amanda turned to me, tears streaking her cheeks. I didn't know, she whispered, about the building, about the money, about any of it. I know, I said gently. Why didn't you tell me? I sighed. Because you needed to see it, not just hear it. She blinked hard, nodding slowly. He was gone. She was free. And for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the girl I used to know, the one who laughed with her father in the kitchen. The one who believed in goodness. She looked at me like she wanted to say more. But words failed, so I saved her from having to try. You should go, I said softly. Rest. Be safe. She hesitated, then whispered, You deserve better than us. No, I said, I just deserve peace. When she walked away that night, I knew something had changed. The truth had done its work. Justice had been served, not in court. Not with shouting or revenge, but with revelation. Sometimes, the only way to heal is to let them see what they turned you into. And when they finally do, you don't need to say a word. The days after the meeting felt eerily calm, like the silence after a storm that had ripped through everything but somehow left you standing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the next blow. No more messages from Chad. No more tension hanging in the air. Just quiet. Until one evening, the quiet knocked on my door. When I opened it, Amanda stood there. Her hands were trembling, and she was holding something I instantly recognized, my mother's old diary. The corners were torn, the spine fragile, the leather faded. I found it, she said softly, eyes glistening. You must have left it here last time I visited. She stepped inside, placing it gently on the coffee table like a sacred offering. I read it, she admitted, her voice small. I wasn't trying to pry. I saw your handwriting on the last page and I needed to understand. My throat tightened. I didn't know about Harold Sterling. She whispered, about the money, about the trust, about any of it. I nodded slowly. I didn't either, not until I had nothing left to lose. Amanda sat down, hands twisting in her lap. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I looked out the window. The world outside was calm. A soft orange dusk settling over the street. Because when I found out, it wasn't about the money. It was about truth, about realizing I came from a woman who fought quietly, who carried shame so I wouldn't have to. I wanted to honor that before I told anyone. She stared at me, tears forming. I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who could do what I did. She whispered, I keep asking myself that every day. I turned to her. You didn't become her all at once. You chose silence, a little at a time, until it became easier than the truth. Amanda nodded, sobbing quietly. Then she looked up, eyes trembling but determined. I left him. The words hit me like thunder and sunlight all at once. She took a deep breath. He went through my phone again. My emails. Followed me to work. I told him to stop. And he lost it. He packed a bag, said he'd come back later. I changed the locks. I exhaled slowly, my hands shaking just a little. Do you know who you are without him? She smiled through tears. Not yet, but I'd rather find out than keep disappearing. I reached out, took her hand, and held it. Good, I said softly. That's the first real thing you've said in a long time. She looked at me, then at the diary. You didn't deserve what I did. She said, what we did. I shook my head gently. Maybe not, but you're here now, and that changes everything. We sat together for a long time, not speaking, the kind of silence that didn't hurt anymore, the kind that stitched something back together. Before she left, she paused at the door. You didn't raise me to be weak. she said. I just forgot how strong you were. I smiled faintly. No, sweetheart, you didn't forget, you just stopped looking. And for the first time, she smiled too, small, uncertain, but real. Blank, underscore, blank. A week later, I received an email from Chad. The subject line made my stomach twist. We need to talk now. I opened it slowly. I know everything, about the building. About the inheritance. About Sterling. You think you can ruin me and walk away? If you don't undo this, I'll go public. Everyone will know what kind of family you come from. I stared at the screen. A cold calm washing over me. He thought he could still scare me. He didn't realize he was already out of moves. I forwarded the email to my attorney. Within 24 hours, Chad received a cease and desist letter, with documentation of every harassing message, falsified document, and complaint he'd filed under fake aliases. My lawyer even included the audio recordings from the building's common areas, his rants, his threats, his unraveling. We didn't have to press criminal charges. Just one defamation suit was enough. 2 days later, Amanda called. Her voice shook. He's gone, she said. He packed up while I was at work. Left a note saying you ruined his life. No, I said softly. He ruined his own. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, almost whispering, I'm sorry, Mom, for ever thinking he deserved my silence. You were scared, I told her. I know what that feels like. Blank, underscore, blank. Months passed. Chad tried one last act of desperation, vague rants on social media about corrupt landlords and family betrayal. But my lawyer sent a second letter, sharper than the first. He went silent after that. Amanda, though, she changed. She moved into a small studio near her job, started therapy, joined an art class. She even painted something for me, a phoenix in reds and golds. Rising through smoke, she said it reminded her of me. I hung it above the fireplace. We didn't talk every day. But when we did, it was real, honest, no pretending, just two women learning how to exist again, apart, but together. Then one morning, I got a letter from Leonard Goldstein. Congratulations, Margaret, the building transfer is complete. The lawsuit against Mr. Harmon has been settled in your favor. You are free to sell, hold, or rebuild as you see fit. I sat with that letter for a long time, tracing every word with my fingertips. It wasn't just about winning. It was about closure. The next day, I called a realtor. I sold the building quietly, without ceremony, no headlines, just a handshake, a pen, and a deep exhale that had been waiting 3 years to escape. Half of the money went to a women's shelter, a new wing called the Eleanor House, named after my mother. The other half, I used to buy a small home back in Cedar Park. A modest 2-bedroom with oak trees and a porch swing, the kind of peace I used to dream of. The day I moved in, Amanda helped me unpack. We didn't say much, but when we sat on the porch together, she smiled faintly. I used to ride my bike down this street, she said. You were always safe here, I told her. I forgot how that felt. She whispered. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup that night, just like when she was little. She burned one side. I laughed. It was the first real laughter we'd shared in years. When she left, I stood by the window with a cup of tea, watching the moonlight stretch across the yard. For the first time, I whispered the words I hadn't been able to before. I forgive you. Not to Amanda, to myself. Because that was the hardest part, not surviving, not rebuilding, but realizing I was never the fire they tried to extinguish. I was the spark they underestimated. They taught me that silence was weakness. But I learned how to weaponize it. They tried to erase me. But I became unforgettable. I sat down, opened my mother's diary one last time, and slipped a note inside for Amanda to find someday. You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth, and the courage to never forget who you are. The clock ticked softly in the background. My tea grew cold, but my heart, after everything, was finally warm. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to win. I just needed to be who I was all along. And now, finally, I was home. Thank you for listening to Revenge in Silence. If this story touched something inside you, if you've ever felt betrayed, forgotten, or underestimated, remember this. Every ending is just a beginning written in quieter ink. Margaret's journey reminds us that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers, and those who once silenced you will one day hear that whisper louder than any scream. If you've ever found your strength again after losing everything, tell us in the comments below. Your voice matters here, because silence is not weakness. It's where healing begins. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for more stories of transformation, justice, and rebirth, where pain becomes purpose. And revenge isn't rage, it's balance. Until next time. This is Revenge in Silence, where the quiet ones finally speak.